Our first story takes us to Los Angeles, where we meet an accomplished best-selling author, Lisa C. Her paternal grandfather's unique story, part of Chinatown's history, has had a great impact on her life and work. Her best-selling books include Shanghai Girls, China Dolls, On Gold Mountain, and Snowflower and the Secret Fan, which many have discovered through the subsequent films starring Vivian Wu and Hugh Jackman.
I would say that first and foremost, I am a writer and a storyteller. But beyond that, I have really, I think over time, kind of become someone who's been really interested in history, interested in sharing history, trying to find stories that have been lost, forgotten, deliberately covered up, particularly about women. And so for me, that's probably my greatest passion. I lived with my mother when I was a little girl, but I spent a lot of time with my father's family in Los Angeles, Chinatown. We had a family store. It's been in the business in our family for over 100 years, and it was filled with all of these Chinese antiques and furniture and silks and all of this wonderful stuff. And at the end of the day, my grandparents and my great aunts and uncles would go to what they called the back of the store. It was actually a little alcove just inside the front door, where they would have a drink and some snacks, but they would also tell these wonderful stories about the family, particularly about my great-grandfather, Feng Si, who came here as a boy and eventually, grew up to be kind of the godfather patriarch of Los Angeles, Chinatown. My family loved to tell stories. They loved to kind of one-up each other on stories. And there were certain stories that were told again and again and again, but always kind of escalating them. My mother was also a writer, and her father was a writer. So I feel like I had these writers on both sides of my family. And being able to tell a good story, being able to entertain, being able to go to the heart of a story or a person or an emotion was something that was just valued throughout my family. My first book, On Gold Mountain, was a big adventure to get it published. It's always hard to have your first book published. But what was interesting for me at the time was publishers were actually looking for other Chinese American stories. I felt that there was a lot of this history that most people didn't know. Here in California, where my family was, Chinese down to a quarter couldn't own property in this state until 1948. Chinese down to a quarter couldn't marry someone who was white until 1948. And then at the federal level, of course, Chinese couldn't become naturalized citizens until 1943. I felt like if I could tell my family's story within that larger history, then people would be able to learn that history in a kind of way of like, oh, what's happening with this family? That's what keeps you turning the pages. Snowflower and the Secret Fan was the first of my historical novels. This is about women in one very remote county in Hunan province, in Jianyang County, where the women for 1,000 years wrote in a secret writing system. I thought this was just the most amazing thing. And when I first learned about it, I thought, how could this exist? And I didn't know. And then how could this exist? And we all didn't know. Because so often we hear about women in the past. There were no women writers, there were no women artists, there were no women historians. But here was an example of something that women invented, used, and again, kept a secret for 1,000 years. I did interview the woman who was at that time the world's oldest living Nushu writer. I was so fortunate to have gotten to meet her. I consider it one of the high points of my life. Snowflower and the Secret Fan became a film. A woman just wrote to me through my website and said, I really love your book. I really would like to produce it. I have a friend who wants to produce it with me. Both women, although they had no experience in making movies before, they certainly had very good connections to get a film made.
Her name was Snowflower. She had a love tongue named Lily, a sworn sister for life. I'm writing a book. It's about the old days. but I think it's really about us.
I'm working on a lot of different things right now. I have recently finished a novel about my great-grandmother, also on my father's side of the family. I'm also beginning to think about what the next novel will be. My two main pieces of advice for aspiring writers are, one, to write 1,000 words a day. Put yourself in the chair and do the work. But the other piece of advice that I feel is equally important is to be passionate about what you do. You have to find this passion within yourself that keeps you moving forward, that keeps you wanting to sit in the chair to do the work, that makes you feel inspired every day to work on it. And I just think that this is the way that we can find real joy in writing, and it will translate out onto the page.